Hi, welcome to our YouTube channel of Ims Kanpur, and let's discuss CAT 2024 Slot 3 Set 4. It looks to be a pure DI based set where data interpretation. So let's read the information given as set. Out of 10 countries, country 1 through country 10, country 9 has the highest GDP. So out of these 10 countries, 9 has highest GDP and country 10 has the highest GDP per capita. GDP per capita is the GDP of a country divided by its population. The table below provides the following data about country 1 through country 8 for the year 2024. So I think the data provided is from country 1 to country 8. Now let's understand what data has been provided to us. Column 1 gives the country's identity. So you can say C1, C2, C3 till C8. Column 2 gives the country's GDP as a fraction of the GDP of country 9. So let us assume that GDP of country 9 can be, let us take 100x, or you can take 100 also. 100x would be a better way of doing it. And column 3 gives the country's GDP per capita as fraction of the GDP per capita of country 10. So let us take GDP per capita of C10 is 100y. So I think base of GDP is 100x, base of this is 100y. Okay. Column 4 gives the country's annual GDP growth rate. On an average, at what percent GDP is growing? So like country 1 GDP is growing at 0.2% annually. Column 5 gives the country's annual population growth rate. At what population is growing? So in C1, I think the population growth is minus 0.12%. Minus indicate population is obviously decreasing with respect to previous year. This is how the data has been given. And at the bottom, you're saying assume that the GDP growth rate and population growth rate of the country will remain constant for the next 3 years. So I think from 2025, 26, 27, for these 3 years, the GDP growth rate as well as population growth rate is going to be the same for next 3 years. Great. So I think we have understood the data. So we can directly go to the question. Let's look at question number 1 of this set. Which among the countries 1 to 8 has the smallest population? Now figure out which country has smallest population. Now how you calculate population? In column 2 you have been given GDP. In column 3 you have been given GDP per capita. So if you divide GDP by GDP per capita, you get your population. Why? Because it is clearly given GDP per capita means GDP divided by population. Right? So if you divide GDP by GDP per capita, you get population. So that is a simple formula that we have to use. Now let's calculate for country C8. C8 GDP will be 0.07% of this 100x. So I can say 7x divide by the GDP per capita will be 41y. Similarly for country 3, if I calculate the same value, it will become 13x divided by 2y. If I do it for country 7, this becomes 8x divided by 30y. And if I do it for country 5, it becomes 10x divided by 36y. Now you see which value is smaller. Now every value has a multiplier of x upon y. So if you multiply all the ratios with the same amount, it doesn't change the property of the ratio. So in this case, the smaller value will depend on these numerical numerator and denominator. So out of 7 by 41, 13 by 2, 8 by 30, 10 by 36, whichever is lowest, that will have smallest population. And we can clearly observe that this value is very big. So you can eliminate. Between 8 by 30 and 10 by 36, obviously C7 is a bigger value. And again, compared to C8, I think C8 is the lowest one because 7 by 41 is the lowest value among all the four. So you can say country 8 is the correct answer. So option first. Option A is the correct answer for this question. So here you don't have to calculate the exact value. Rather, you have to compare. Most of the time, CAT asks these kind of questions, which one is the maximum or minimum. So what you can do, you can compare and try to eliminate the options rather than using calculator each and every time. Let's go to the next question. Let me erase this. Now next question says the ratio of countries 4 GDP, right? So country 4's GDP to country 5 GDP in 2006. Great. So let us try to calculate this. So what I have to calculate it, country 4's GDP is to country 5 GDP in 2026. Now you know the GDP of 2024 and we know the GDP growth rate. So what I'll do is, let's go to country 4. Country 4 GDP is going to be 12x because we assume that country 9's GDP and GDP growth rate to be 12x. Now this GDP will rise by 0.5%, right, for next 2 years. So I would say multiply by 1.005 into 1.005, because if a value increases by 50%, I will multiply by 1.5, 5%, I'll multiply 1.05, 0.5, 1.005. So this is the GDP in 2026 for country 4. Similarly, I can calculate the GDP of country 5, that is 10x. Growth is by 1.007 into 1.007. So primarily the data that I'm going to get is this. That is 12x multiplied by 1.005 into 1.005 upon 10x into. Now if you observe very closely, these are very negligible value. They won't make much difference. So if you simplify this, your ratio will come approximately 1.2. Now my answer will be slightly less than 1.2 because numerator is smaller, denominator is bigger. So overall this value will be slightly less than 1.2. Let's check the answer. A value that is closer to 1.2, slightly less, is going to become our answer. So I would say all these options are eliminated and the closest value, that is 1.2, is option A. So you can clearly say option A is the correct answer. Again, you have to, observe the things very smartly rather than going for calculator. So sometimes calculator can act as a speed breaker in questions like this because you end up doing a lot of calculation. If you're smart in your observation, I think things will become quite comfortable for you. Let's proceed to the next question and see what is there in that question. So I think now this question says, let me erase the data. Yeah. Which one among the countries 1, 4, 5, 7, 11 largest population in 2027? So you calculate population in 2024 and then again you have been given population growth rate. Now if you look at these population growth rate are very insignificant. So maybe the country which has maximum population in 2024 is likely to have maximum population 27 also. But let's try to do it a little more. For country 1, population I can write 15 upon 41. I am not writing x by y because it is going to remain common. So I'll just compare this. And now population growth is minus 0.12%. So what is going to be? You will multiply it with 0.998 into again 0.9988 into 0.998. Now this is going to be population country 1. Similarly do for country 5. 10 by 36 into 0.31. So you can say 1.0031 into 1.0031 into 1.003. Similarly, do it for C7. Country 7 has 8 by 30 into 0.9989 into 0.9989 into 0.998. And the last one is country 4, that is 12 by 38, right? So you can say 12 by 38 into 1.0049 into 1.0049 into 1.0049. Now we'll figure out which one has the largest population. So if you can figure out which one has the largest population, I think these value looks to me very negligible. It won't make much difference. So I should think which one is the highest population among all these values. If you look at 15 by 41, 10 by 36, this is almost 1.5 times, while there is a marginal difference. So I would say C1 is bigger than C5. C5 is gone. Between C1 and C7, again I can say C1 is bigger. and between these two also C1 is bigger. So I would say country 1 would have largest population. See, these values are pretty negligible. You can ignore them because 0.9988, hardly there's a change. So you can say country 1, option A is going to be the correct answer. Because if you do these kind of calculation, it will eat up almost 4 to 5 minutes. So the question is deliberately designed in such a way that if you're a smart observer, you'll be able to crack this question quickly. And that should be your objective. And that is what we have to learn during our practice. Let's go to the next question. Now, again, a very good question in terms of your observation. For how many countries among C1 through C8 will GDP per capita will be lower? Like for GDP per capita should be lower as compared to 2024. So GDP per capita should be lower. Now, how do you calculate GDP per capita in 2027? So you calculate GDP in 27 divide by population in 27. That is what you're supposed to do. Then you will get GDP per capita. And here GDP per capita. Now, this value will only be lower when your GDP growth rate is less and population growth rate is high. Then only you can say GDP per capita will become higher. See, the question is, in how many countries in 2027 GDP per capita is lower than 2024? Now GDP per capita 27 में कब lower होगा, right? जब न्यूमरेटर कम हो और डिनोमिनेटर बड़ा हो. It means अगर GDP slow grow कर रहा है and population is growing rapidly, like GDP growing slowly and population growing fast, then this thing will happen. Your GDP per capita will become lower. Now let's observe. Now for country 1, GDP growth rate is at 0.2%, while population is decreasing, which means GDP per capita will go up. It won't come down. Now have this kind of observation. So gone. Same is here because GDP is growing at positive rate and population is decreasing. So obviously GDP per capita will increase. Imagine for a country GDP is growing at a positive rate, population is decreasing. So GDP per person is going to increase. And we have to figure out for how many countries it is decreasing. Here, GDP is growing at a very rapid pace, that is 6.5%. Population is growing at a very small rate. So again, here, per GDP per capita will be higher. Same is true here also because GDP growth rate is faster as compared to population growth rate. Same is true over here. Same is true for country 6. Same is true for country 7. So I think for all the countries, GDP per capita will increase. So no country will have. So the answer is going to be 0 for this particular question. So that's it.